On the previous episode of Simpler Times, like a freaking year ago. So it's good to see timeless games like Centipede live on through today. But again, with these newer versions, we sometimes run into this problem of having to play the game using a joystick or directional pad. You know, what's wrong with that? I mean, what's wrong with using our handy-dandy joysticks? I mean, we've been using them for years to play games. I mean, what's wrong with that? See, it's cool because the cutscenes in this are in anime. Therefore, this game is technically half anime. Therefore, these Cyclops jellyfish shitting super bouncy balls on my head makes total sense in context. Also, this music, half anime. Just give it a listen. Ah! What is this, some kind of half anime?
Tio, listen to my words.
What are you, Dragon Ball?
No, I am the all-knowing.
The all-knowing what? The all-knowing what?
That's it. Just the all-knowing.
That doesn't make any sense. The all-knowing is an adjective, not a noun.
Well, whatever, Mr. Master's degree in English. You never even watched Dragon Ball.
Touché.
Do you know why you're here?
Someone click the button.
You need to finish what you started. Look at you. Is this the path you want to take? Nothing but Let's Plays?
Work for Markiplier.
Markiplier is attractive, charismatic, friendly to people, and in shape. You're an obese, socially inept 30-something-year-old with a neck beard. On paper, you're repulsive.
Yeah. Subscribe today.
Let's face it. I'm all you've got, Tio. You know what you must do.
Wait, is this where I reach out to touch you and then I just suddenly wake up and you're now this inanimate object that happens to be the main symbol for the entire episode and I have this big dumb epiphany and go, oh.
Yep.
Gotcha. Off we go then. Oh! Right. Yes. Well then, episode 2! In this episode, I'm not going to focus on any one game. Instead, I want this to be a loving tribute to the unique arcade controls that we rarely, if at all, ever see these days. It's also a critique of how game companies have been getting it wrong somewhat in an attempt to feed the nostalgic consumer machine. Retro. Retro. I'm retro. So let's go back for a moment to Centipede. Weird-looking head shooting lasers. I called him Snaky. There are bugs coming at you, mushrooms in the way, shoot everything, pew 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 and such. You want to play it at home? Don't have the money or space needed to own an actual arcade cabinet? Okay, here's the Atari 2600 version. Just one catch. Everything is rectangles now. It doesn't look as cool. Oh, and you play the game using a joystick. And that's not how this game was originally intended to be played. Centipede was meant to be played with a trackball. Yeah, I know how snobbish and game collectorish that may have sounded to you, and you're probably thinking at this point, I'm just feeding you some bullshit straight from an 80s video game commercial. You're not a true Centipede player unless you get the trackball. But it's true. In fact, this is a complaint that lives on through today. We're just talking about different controllers here. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. The old controller versus keyboard and mouse debate. And while I'm not a PC gamer per se, I've been a console gamer all my life, I believe I've reached a full understanding of those who prefer to use a keyboard and mouse over a gamepad, especially when it comes to certain types of games. Okay, so scenario. You're playing a game and all of a sudden there's an enemy behind you. With a mouse, you can just zoop, swing around and blow with a fire button. There's no way to do that with an analog stick or D-pad in most games. You're relying on either a button that gives you a single fixed speed of movement, or an analog stick that might give you varying speeds, but still limits your reaction time. The result is you have to hold left or right and wait to be fully turned around, which can equal losing a lot. And then you have to feebly argue that no, you do not suck at games. In the context of those scenarios, yes, a A gamepad is inferior to a keyboard and mouse. It's the same principle with classic trackball games like Centipede. The freedom you have to move about and strategize and play the game in your own unique way is afforded to you by the use of an intuitive control scheme, i.e. the trackball. Now take a look at this. Now if I wanted to take out a centipede head on the left here, then fly over to the right to shoot down a flea, and still have enough time to go back over to the left and kill the scorpion before it leaves the screen, I can do that with a trackball, and it would feel very natural, much as if I were rolling a ball along a tabletop. Point A, point B, point C. I probably couldn't come close to doing that with a joystick. More than likely, I'd end up chasing enemies across the screen and missing. Hey, come back! Because my character's movement is limited to 1 speed, while enemies in games of this type and this age tend to go faster and faster as the game progresses. Now let's take a look at another example, Missile Command, which also uses a trackball. Here you control the aiming cursor and can move all around the screen much as you would with a mouse. It's no...
Hey.
Hey?
How's it hanging?
You tell me. It's no big deal to play this game with a joystick or D-pad in the earlier levels when the enemy missiles aren't coming at you that fast. But you get into the later levels and, well, good luck. Go on, move faster, you pleb. Feeling frustrated yet? Makes you just want to turn off the console, doesn't it? You get that feeling of, what's the point? I can't possibly go any further in the game. They're just way too fast. But if you use the trackball, you can move the cursor freely from place to place as quickly as your reflexes will allow. You anticipate where the warheads are going and then bam, bam, bam. Now, when the missiles get faster, the game doesn't become impossible to play, it simply becomes more of a challenge. The key to winning is, and should be, your reaction time and precision, and should never be dependent on the hardware. Now let's take a little trip. I'm at Robot City Games and Arcade in Binghamton, New York, one of the largest retro video arcades in upstate New York. This place is a beaut. I highly recommend that you come by and check it out for yourself if you ever get the chance. I want to play them all. I want to play them all. I want to play them all. The problem with the controls in most of the ports and re-releases of these classic arcade games is that they rely on either a joystick or a D-pad, and as a result, are detrimental to the gameplay itself. A lot of these games are so simple conceptually, and yet game companies tend to be a little bit careless when it comes to just shoving them into compilations and marketing them to people based solely on nostalgic value. Given, many of these games played just fine with a joystick or D-pad because their original arcade versions used a joystick. But what about the ones that didn't? Centipede, Missile Command, Breakout, Tempest, Capcom Bowling. Sorry, I've always really liked Capcom Bowling. Super Sprint. Have fun controlling that one with a joystick. We've already talked about the trackball. Now let's take a look at some of the other more popular non-joystick controls from days of arcade past. We have the spinner, or dial, or paddle. It's simple. Turn or spin it in either direction, your character moves with you. The harder you spin it, the faster your character goes. In the arcades, spinners were usually a little heavy, made of metal, to give it a better, more tangible feel. As a result, it made it feel like you were physically moving the character on the screen with just a turn of your hand. That illusion allowed for better hand-eye coordination and made it feel like you were doing the things on the screen, not watching your character do those things. Classic games that used the spinner included Breakout, Tempest, Arkanoid, and of course, one of the first ever arcade games, Pong, which, if you didn't already know, is short for ping pong. Thus the reason we refer to the home version of the spinner as a paddle. Much as is the case with the trackball games, a little, or a lot, of what makes these games great is lost when you try to play them with a joystick. It becomes frustrating when I can move at only one speed, especially when that speed isn't fast enough. Atari must have known this was an important concern when they ported Pong, Breakout, and other spinner games to home consoles. See this? This is what you got when you bought the Atari 2600 brand new back in the 70s. The system, bundled with a game, 2 joysticks, and... oh, what's this? Those are paddles! Now I can play that there electronic ping pong game! God damn it. Moving on, there were a bunch of unique controllers utilized by arcades, especially in the 70s and early 80s during the birth and boom of the video arcade. You had handlebars, periscopes, the control panel of a battle tank. Eventually, arcades had us literally sitting in the cockpit of every vehicle from crotch rockets to fucking fighter jets. There was one peripheral, though, that had a pretty good run for a couple decades. The gun. What kind of gun, you ask? Pistol, Uzi, revolver, shotgun, assault rifle? The answer is yes, and then some. From the 70s through the 90s, these games were staples in arcades everywhere. And for the most part, these weren't just gimmicky attractions either. Many of them were very fun games to play. Hell, I have so much fun playing these games, I'm starting to think I'm what's wrong with America. That was our gun control joke.
Yeah, unsubscribe.
Just how over the top and fantastic did these firearm-based games get back in the day? One word. Bazooka. But how well did this arcade awesomeness translate over to the home consoles? One more word. Meh. That's not to take away one bit from the innovation that was the light gun, which was perfected by Nintendo with their ever-popular Light Zapper. Now, for those arcade games that required shooting things one blast at a time, semi-automatic style, the light gun worked beautifully for that purpose. But for those automatic fire games like Operation Wolf, for example, which required you to hold down the trigger, you couldn't do that with a light gun, and the games like that became painful, in the literal sense, to play. In the arcade, you simply held the trigger back. It was supposed to simulate the automatic feel of an Uzi. The added challenge came from conserving your ammo. Now let me show you what using the light zapper in this game is like. Ugh. Ow, 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 ow. See, my hand is already hurting because of how fast and rapidly the game expects me to shoot. Ugh. I can't hold down the trigger for automatic fire either. I have to shoot as fast as I can when those helicopters and tanks arrive because they take so many hits. My hand gets so fatigued just playing in the first couple minutes of this game, and I end up shooting slower. Ugh, it's like the light gun equivalent of the power pad here. And some of you know what I'm talking about, where you had to basically reenact Flashdance in order to get ahead. He's a maniac with a gun. And now he's dead. Instead of having fun, the average person is left physically sore and made to feel like they're bad at games or something because they can't keep up. The irony of this particular game is that you're actually better off using the standard controller to play it, because holding down the A button actually gave you automatic fire, but you still had to move the aiming cursor with the D-pad, and we're back to this now. Ta-da! The next controller I want to pay tribute to is kind of similar to the spinner. The racing wheel. Nowadays, racing wheels for gaming are these beefed up, expensive, true-to-life steering wheels that give you that real racing feel. Nah, I'm just talking about this. Whee! A lot of the older racing games had them, and there's not much to them. Usually there was a gas pedal to step on at the bottom of the cabinet, and when you got to the turns, you just spin that wheel like a madman. Nothing fancy, it was just crazy, stupid fun. Pretty simple. After all, this is simpler times. Unfortunately, there were hardly any home versions of the spinning racing wheel, and really there wasn't much of a demand for them. But that doesn't mean we can't go ahead and re-release some of the games that used the wheel. Super spread! Finally, and I know I'm being a little bit nitpicky here, but there's the joystick. But T.O., there's a joystick on every controller today. Wrong. There's an analog joystick on every controller today. There's a difference. In earlier decades, the joystick was basically a D-pad on a stick. 8 directions, each one triggered by a button, or by 2 buttons simultaneously. And then along came the analog stick, and with that it's all about moving more fluidly in both straight lines and more precise curves, and at variable speeds. Fast. It's not the most rigid control scheme, but then again, rigidity is exactly what you need when playing these old 8-directional arcade games. Again, I know I'm being a little nitpicky here, but consider this. If game companies ever decide that they want to stop engineering directional pads into their controllers, well then you've just rendered pretty much all of these retro collections and compilations useless, and you'll probably never see them getting released again. Or maybe you will, I don't know. Which brings me back to these greatest hits compilations. 4 of the games I've already mentioned so far, Centipede, Missile Command, Breakout, and Tempest, make up 2/3 of arcade's greatest hits, the Atari Collection 1, a game I've already mentioned in the previous episode. It was released for multiple consoles in the 90s, PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Super Nintendo, and one of the first ever greatest hits compilations in the history of home gaming, which is probably why I like picking on this one in particular. It pretty much helped get the game's nostalgia ball rolling. And it was a pretty cool concept for that time. Wow, all of those gigantic arcade cabinets fit into one compact disc and/or gaming cartridge? We truly do live in amazing times. Now we can play these games which gave us or our parents so many fond memories right in our own homes. That is, if you don't mind using a D-pad to play games that weren't designed to be played that way. And oh, for PlayStation owners, you couldn't even use the DualShock sticks to play these games, as this title predated the upgraded version of the original PlayStation controller, which ruled out being able to play Battlezone with 2 joysticks as it was meant to be played. Any way you slice it, you're stuck with the D-pad. It makes the games more difficult to play and, in my opinion, less fun. Now you're stuck with 5 games that don't technically work properly, and Asteroids. It's cool, I guess. Asteroids is fun. Pew, 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 pew. To be fair, the PlayStation did provide the ability to play these games using a console-specific mouse.
Hey.
What?
Squeak. Squeak, squeak. Okay, bye.
The Saturn did as well, supposedly. This must mean I can use my SNES mouse on my Super Nintendo version, right? Nope. And over time, more and more of these classic game collections would be released, with fewer and fewer available controllers to play many of the games properly. Does anybody know of any trackballs or spinner dials that were made and sold for the PS2 or Xbox or later consoles after that? Put your hands down, homemade mod people. I'll get to you in a bit. So what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to play these games the way they were meant to be played without having to purchase a freaking arcade cabinet? Sure, let me just spend $700. Hold on, let me get my debit card. You gotta get that up the stairs, though. Should I rent a dolly? I think you should rent a dolly. Let's load that thing up here. I think it'll look nice in the kitchen. Well, the Atari 2600 and later systems like the 5200 and the ColecoVision made special trackball controllers, which they sold separately, so people could have something closer to the arcade experience. There were plenty of special controllers made for consoles like the NES as well. For example, Taito knew that their home console port of Arkanoid for the NES wasn't going to be worth selling, let alone playing, without including a spinner peripheral in the game's packaging. Got a retro racing game that calls for a spinning wheel controller? I suppose you could use one of those realistic steering wheel controllers, but you're not going to enjoy it as much. I would imagine that modding your own old-school racing wheel controller wouldn't be too difficult if you know what you're doing. And speaking of mods, here's an example of a cool idea. There are people that make and sell modded Xbox controllers that come equipped with an optical trackball-like device instead of a right analog stick. Seems to work just fine with first-person shooters. Would they work well with trackball-based retro games? I don't know. If anyone's tried it out, please leave a comment below, or better yet, do a review. Either way, thank you, modding community. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a big part of what keeps video gaming the fun hobby that it is. The one problem, however, with all of those options, special controllers for obscure vintage consoles, elaborate steering wheels, modded controllers, is that they can be expensive. Usually, only serious gamers and collectors are willing to spend that kind of money. Now, are you expecting the average person, who isn't a gamer per se, to play and replay one of these packaged arcade re-releases enough times to the point where they get addicted to it, become super good at it, can go really far and earn a big high score and will appreciate it for the fine game that it is? Because if they're playing it with standard controllers, that's probably not going to happen. It's more likely that the person will either go, I don't get it. Why were the older generations so into this? Or, yeah, that brought back some cool memories. That was fun. Wish it wasn't so hard to play it with this controller, though. And they never go back to playing it. It just sits on the shelf, waiting to eventually have one of those pink $1 stickers slapped on it and be sold off at a garage sale to the next dummy who goes, ooh, I remember those games. We used to go to the bowling alley with our league team. We'd get some pop and order chicken fingers and play those games till our fingers bled. You know what I mean? And then that person will take it home and play it and not really like it, and then forget about it. And the cycle just continues. And all the while, maybe this is just a way out there thought, perhaps this cycle contributes in a small way to people's opinion that these older games just weren't that great, or aren't anywhere near as fun as the games of today. Whether there's any truth to that notion, I stand by my opinion that re-releasing some of these classics without having the proper controls readily available made them less fun to play. But would it have been better to just not re-release them at all? Ever? Not necessarily. I mean, just look at the ports, re-releases, and compilations that did make sense. You still have superb classic games like Pac-Man, Galaga, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders, and so on. You have the relatively lesser-known gems like Burger Time, Joust, Gauntlet, Defender, Wizard of War, the list goes on. All of which can be played just fine with whatever standard controller you already have. Even the games that are played with 2 joysticks, games like Robotron 2084 and Smash TV, have been handled pretty nicely on modern day consoles since the PlayStation 1. Look, 2 joysticks. And if you want something more precise, look at that. There are buttons on each side that form directional buttons. Look at what the developers at Acclaim did with the NES port of Smash TV. Just plug in a second controller and whoop! Yeah, that takes creative thinking, ingenuity, making an actual effort to make sure the game is fully playable on whatever console you're porting it to. Something that companies like Atari and Midway, etc. should have thought about when putting these compilations together. And maybe back then, they couldn't make trackball and spinner games play intuitively without needing some big, cumbersome add-on. Fine. In that case, they should have kept the porting of these compilations limited to those platforms that used, wait for it, a mouse.
Hey, you.
The most practical interactive peripheral known in the 90s. Mice, while not identical to trackballs or spinners in functionality, were the only other means to properly play these games in the post-8-bit era, thanks to their nearly fail-proof intuitiveness. To use one was to immediately have it feel like an extension of your hand. This explains how, despite many attempts to turn classic arcade games into a nostalgic cash grab, the most popular way to play these games remains emulation on home computers. It's the least ethical way, it's the least legal way, but sadly it remains the only way that makes sense. But now engineers have found a way to make touch interfaces a regular thing in households. Smartphones, tablets, drawing surfaces, and now trackpads. The use for this mechanic in retro gaming makes so much sense that it hurts. Swiping can be almost the exact same action as rolling a trackball. Moving an object right along with your finger has the same amount of control and assertion as using a spinner. The racing wheel? Meet the touch wheel. Why not? Can't we somehow take advantage of this technology to revive classic arcade games? Atari certainly did with their Greatest Hits app, and the trackball games on that app work, and work well. The joystick games, not so much. What about home consoles? I don't know, take a look at that touchpad they put on the PS4 controller. That's gotta be good for something, right? You just know that manufacturers will eventually figure out how to implement touch technology in a way that makes even more sense to gaming in general. Oh, and those gun-based arcades? Light guns are good and all, but what about those rapid-fire automatic weapons games from the past that some of us just love to play so much? I have only one thing to say to that. Satoru Iwata, I love you. Rest in peace, buddy. But what if? What if home console manufacturers never quite get it right when it comes to re-releasing these classic games? What if nothing will ever truly compare with the experience of playing these games in their original form? That would be unfortunate, seeing as how these cabinets are growing increasingly difficult to find as time goes on. Manufacturing is all but halted long ago, and the video arcade itself has been on the endangered species list for over a decade. And what we're left with are games like Golden Tee and Big Buck Hunter, and games like that at bars and sports-themed restaurants across the country. I mean, just look at these games. Oh my God, there is hope. This needs to be addressed. I'm T.O. Until next time, have fun, be well, keep it simple. Ow.